As we dive into it, I want to start off by introducing myself. I am Raath with Kotter. I have been in the space of organizational performance for a very long time, and it's an absolute delight to be able to spend some time with the great people who you're going to hear from today. And I'm going to introduce Suzy and Vanessa to you in just a second. A few protocols, ground rules. You hopefully have questions. If you fully engage with us, please put those questions into the Q&A that you see, that you should see. And if we get to them, we absolutely will cover them. And if we don't, we'll attempt to do that as part of a follow-up. So know that we will absolutely try and get to every question. At the end of the session, what we'll also do is send a recording out to you so you can view that again and or share it with others. And we will also be sending out a guide on some of the things that we at Kotter do when we typically go through and start looking at change the way we're going to talk about today. So that'll be helpful, something that you can actually use with your own teams that'll benefit you. So let's dive into it. I'm coming to you from the beautiful city of Calgary. I have a gorgeous view of the Rocky Mountains with a little bit of snow on them, even though it is June. Gorgeous 9:30 in the morning. And I'm joined today by two really terrific panelists who are going to help us unpack this conversation. The first is Suzy Hilton-Esaki, who is the VP of Transformation Change at Nike. Suzy, where are you coming to us from today?
I'm here in beautiful Portland, Oregon. First time in about 2 weeks that it has not been raining. I think it's headed for an 80-degree weather day, 8:30 here on the west coast of the US.
Oh, how fantastic. Right. And I do see a little bit of green and sunshine out of your windows. So that's just fantastic. Thanks for joining us this morning, nice and early.
Yeah.
Vanessa Akhtar, who is the managing director and leads the consulting practice here at Kotter. Vanessa, where are you coming from today?
I am coming from just outside of Boston, and we have actually shockingly been lucky with weather. I feel like I have to make a weather comment since you two have already. We have shockingly had very nice weather recently. I'm waiting for the tides to turn because it's Boston, so it never stays steady here.
Well, we're going to dive into it. We've had a fair number of people who've joined us since, and a quick recap if you've joined us since we started. Any questions that you have, please put them into the Q&A box in the Zoom. We will get to them if we can. We've only got 30 minutes or 26 now, so we might not get to them all. And if we don't, we'll do that as part of a follow-up. We will also send a recording to you as well as a worksheet that you can work through at the end of the session. So with that, we're going to dive into talking about transformation. We're going to talk about change. We're going to talk about how you can set yourself up for the best chances of success and do that as fast as possible. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Vanessa and Suzy are going to kind of kick us off.
Great. Thank you, Russ. So why are we here today, right? Why did we have so many folks sign up for this webinar? Why are we so passionate about this topic? We know that in today's world, change is no longer a luxury, right? It is going to be a key differentiator, change and adaptability for organizations in terms of not only growth, but really survival in today's world. And yet we know so many organizations struggle to adapt. And it's interesting. I was in a session earlier this week with a group of about 12 CEOs of high growth companies, and all of them agreed very quickly, we need to adapt. We need to innovate. We know we need to do things differently because what got us here today is not what's going to get us into the future. And yet they all also realized, ooh, I'm not quite sure how to articulate that truly ambitious leap breakthrough performance or how to help my people get there. So even a group of CEOs that are leading very high growth organizations are still struggling with some of this. And so it's really important for us to be thinking about how do we help people unlock that, right? And Suzy, your role at Nike is fairly new, right? This role around transformation, which I think just speaks to the recognition that building change and building adaptability sort of, and I have to use the cliche for an apparel company, right? Knit into the fabric really of how work gets done at Nike.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Kotter team for these amazing opportunities to get together and share our learnings and continue to develop our capabilities as change professionals. So thank you. But yeah, Vanessa, I've been at Nike over 27 years and had many different roles, both from formal change management positions to HR business partner. But more recently, we started a Nike Acceleration Office, which my leader reports directly into our CEO, John Donahoe. And I'm heading up transformational change. And, you know, I would say that Nike over the years, you know, is a growth and innovation company. And one of our foundational principles back from 1977 has been our business is change. It was our first principle. It's part of our DNA. It's our just do it spirit and culture. And it's really been the secret sauce to our success over the years. But as you just mentioned, from, you know, your interaction with CEOs, irrespective of our growth and our dominant position in the market, we found ourselves with this continually shifting external environment, but also to meet the needs internally of our next-gen workforce, we've had to become a lot more clearly focused around what is our case for change, what is our strategic vision, and making sure that like a lot of our, all of our leaders and organization are fully aligned around our mission, value, and purpose.
Yeah. So Russ, you and I have talked a lot about if we know what good looks like, what's keeping people from getting there? What are some of the barriers and the things that get in the way? And I know you have fancier technology than Suzy and I have. So I'm going to pitch over to you maybe to tee up some of those barriers for us so that we can then later in the webinar pivot to what are the strategies to address some of those.
Oh, terrific. Yeah, happy to. You know, and so I'll pull up a whiteboard because I like thinking visually, and I just had to try and capture what I could there a little bit. Suzy, you know, you said our business has changed, and that's my attempt at the Nike swoosh. I'm not a drawer, I'm not an artist, and my handwriting's not particularly good. So that's not what I'm here for. Hopefully I have ideas that are better than my handwriting. But I want to put out three things and then test them, certainly with you, Suzy, because this is what you see right now. The first thing that we know is that and you said this, right? Your leaders need to be, and I'm just going to write this in here, leaders need to be really aligned. The second part of it is, what are they aligned around? And so they've got to be aligned from at least our vantage point, is they've got to be aligned around this whole idea of a and you used the word, I think, Vanessa as well, a bold ambition, something that they're going after. But the third part of this was just really, really key. And you talked about change readiness and the sort of change adaptability piece is actually having a believable and realistic plan to getting it done. And what I'd love to build on a little bit, Suzy, with you is what happens when these things don't come together. So because these are, you know, if you think about a triangle, you can't have two of them at the expense of one because things start to happen. So you talked about working really hard at building that leadership alignment and getting everyone focused around that case for change. What tends to happen when you don't see that? And we can kind of obviously supplement with what we see as well in our experience.
Mm-hmm. Well, first, I'd say, you know, I start with bold ambition. You know, Nike has always had an unwavering focus on our sport and athletes. Like our mission is deeply rooted in our why, and that's remained unchanged for many years. And that is to bring innovation and inspiration to every athlete, asterisk, in the world. And that asterisk stands for if you have a body, you're an athlete. And so, however, like today, we find ourselves at this inflection point at Nike, as I mentioned earlier, like especially as we've come through more recent years and through the pandemic, as you know, with our continued growth and especially the scale that we're now faced with, and our shift in our workforce demographics. And again, you know, the external forces, I think, are constantly shifting. But we've had to ground it in our bold ambition. We've got to get really much clear on what that strategy and strategic growth outlook and focus is going to be, and then ensure all of our leaders are aligned at all levels of the organization, which what I have seen when it doesn't work, you know, it's a fragmented strategy and you just don't get the momentum and speed you know, that you have to be able to move through change early on. And so, you know, we've seen that, and I'm not saying that we're all fully aligned today, but certainly, you know, without that, no matter what plan you put in place, it starts with the ambition and the leader alignment first.
You know, I fundamentally believe this. I call it the sort of the myth of strategy. And that is that we default so much, we putting the word strategy in front of so many things to make it sort of elevated in status because we think it's more important. And the same thing happened around leadership a long time ago. Dr. Kotter's talked about how leadership has almost come at the expense of really strong management because everyone wants to be a leader. You know, no one wants to be a manager. It's like everyone wants to do strategic stuff. The challenge with that, though, is that we start focusing so much on the strategy and the plan that it comes at the expense of sort of that bigger, you talked about every athlete. That is so powerful. And I've read about that, but I've never heard it from somebody at Nike. The idea that you actually have that thing, whether you call it a true north or a purpose or something bigger, but having that to guide before you get to strategy. Yet so much of the work that we often get called into to support, we've got a really good strategy, but our team's just not changing. It's like, all right, okay, so let's reverse engineer this a little bit. If you've got the strategy, what is it in pursuit of? And we find that teams actually can't articulate that bold ambition to the point that you just have. How do you find that needs to shift, Suzy? And you talked about being at an inflection point right now at Nike. How do you find that you take that bold ambition and you calibrate it or refocus it a little bit or shift it as needs change or needs must? How have you done that at Nike?
Yeah, and Phil Knight, our founder, is still very much involved in as part of our board, and we are committed to ensuring that we don't move away from our mission and purpose. And so again, I think, how do we leverage that strength to ground us back in what makes us great and what has created us, to be successful in the past with our consumers and with all athletes around the world? And I think, so that's not shifting, but certainly our strategic pillars in terms of in alignment with that purpose and vision and our values, inherent at the core of our culture, just is our guiding light. And, it's interesting because I think you mentioned that, if sometimes it's not easy as that strategy shifts to shift your team. I find it also that our teams are shifting a lot. And maybe the purpose and the vision isn't, but Nike has historically had a very tenured workforce, and again, especially through the last few years and with our scale and growth, that demographic looks different. And so we've had to face the challenge as well: is how do we reground new team members, new leaders at all levels of the organization globally in that bold ambition and strategy? And, both the strategy continuously shifts, the demographic of our leadership team and our organization shifts. So you're constantly having to adapt and be agile in both of those.
You've made me think of something, and we didn't talk about this previously, but I'm not a believer, and this might be provocative, and I think Jeanette and Vanessa on our team are probably going to go, oh gosh, what's he about to say? But I'm not a fan of I'm not a believer of the phrase change fatigue, because I think it's a little bit of a cop-out. It's like saying, well, I don't want to live anymore because things are changing too much. Like, we don't really have a choice. And you talked about values and recalibrating those and regrounding new team members coming in. What's your point of view, Suzy, on change fatigue? And is it a thing, or is it a consequence of either perhaps not having one of these three things dialed in properly?
Yeah, I agree that change is constant. And I think that has also been, what Nike has faced over the many years, but it's much faster, much more complex now. And again, I keep referring back to Nike's size and scale. I think irrespective of, where you're at in the industry or, what business you're part of, I think certainly when you're bigger, it's much harder. But I would say we have a responsibility. Yes, we've got to build the capability to be more change agile. That's a lot of the, the mission and vision of my transformational change team, so that it just becomes inherent in the way that we do work, and people know how to individually manage through change, and leaders and managers, you know, have that skill set and ability to lead that on their own with their teams. However, I will say, at an enterprise level, we have the responsibility to manage how much change we're putting into the system at any given time, and the sequencing, pacing, and phasing of that change. You know, we've got to be able to monitor both the formal and informal. We drive a portfolio, a pretty significant portfolio of strategic initiatives, and we are looking and accountable for looking at that change fatigue. And it's not as, it's more so how are we being thoughtful again about the way that we deploy that change to ensure maximum success, maximum value realization. So it might mean we're putting it in, but we're not putting it in now, or we're going to sequence these things together, or we're going to, you know, carve it up to make sure that teams that have the capacity can go after it first. And so I think it is very much, I'd say on both sides, it's not going to go away. We've got to build the capability, but we can be very, very thoughtful of the way that we're introducing it to the organization.
You know, Vanessa, I want to ask you here, because we do work in similar industries. And one of the interesting points that we were chatting about recently is just something that Suzy touched on as well. It's the volume of initiatives. You talked about recalibrating strategic pillars, and that's critical, of course. What are you seeing, Vanessa, in the work that you're doing, that we're doing with teams? How are they handling this idea that there's such a huge portfolio or a corpus of things that need to come at a team?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I may actually also throw up a slide, because I think it's a useful transition as we think about what good looks like. And I think teams are handling this in different ways, right? So some are doing it really well, and there are a lot that are articulating priorities, but they are not then articulating trade-offs, which is where this sense of overwhelm comes from. I think also a key component is knitting it all together, right? So how is it a holistic story? So when we think about what does it really take to do this well, the first is to let's pause and say, understand current state. And so often we see executive teams jump straight to strategy, and they say, no, we understand what's happening. We know where we need to go. But they don't pause to say, where are we doing really well? Where might we be missing the mark, either in the market or in terms of how we're communicating to our people, what have you? And then really, what is the external environment telling us we need to do and can do? So like, what really are the opportunities out there that maybe we're not paying attention to? And using that to then create that alignment around what that exciting, ambitious future is that's really meant to catalyze action. Right. So I think that's a key component of this, and where a lot of organizations are falling down is that they're not telling the story around change initiatives in a way that catalyzes action from their workforce. Right. Senior leaders understand it. They think they've got a great plan, but it's not getting down to the workforce in a way where they can help. And I think that's where the roadmap can really come into play. And not only the roadmap of what is the change strategy, what are the milestones we need to hit, what are the outcomes we're trying to drive, but what are the behaviors that we need to get there? And I think that's often missed as well. And I've seen in a number of organizations that I've been working with recently, once they nail that behaviors piece, it seems to unlock so much, because individual contributors, managers, senior leaders, everybody can see themselves in a behavior, right? Where sometimes the high level strategy feels like, oh, that's just for senior folks. What can I do?
Well, and Vanessa, I know we've got one or two questions that have come in and one that came in before, but just before we get there, I think this is an interesting point. And actually, Suzy, I want to come back. Something that you talked about, I agree that it's got to start with that aspiration. It's got to be bigger than you could. If you could achieve it by not changing anything, then it's probably not big enough, right? So it needs to be something that makes you kind of go, how are we going to do this? You know, when JFK talked about getting a man to the moon, and putting foot on the moon, we'd never gone to space to you know, and landed something and returned it. And here we're talking about doing something we'd never done before. So it required a fundamental rewiring of how we thought about things. And you talked about, once you have that, getting you said leaders, and you said leaders at every level to avoid the fragmentation. And I was kind of capturing that as we were talking. Tying in now to what Vanessa's talked about behaviors and how behaviors need to shift, going faster. You said change is faster and more complex. How have you handled the behavior dimension within Nike? I think that's kind of ultimately going to determine how well you accelerate and where you land, right?
Yeah, you know, we're in a lot of conversation right now around business and culture, and you know, we are aligned as a leadership team that they are not separate. You have to embed any culture shifts because, as we know, behavior, habits, and mindset equals culture. But it can't be something done separate to the change. It has to be integrated in. And so, you know, right now, we're actually in a fortunate position at Nike because we've just been implementing Workday, and one of the capabilities that we're going to be implementing is our new performance excellence or performance management process. And so we literally in the next couple of weeks, as we've outlined our strategy and we've got really clear, I love this framework. This is exactly the process that we have moved through. As I said, we're like grounded in our bold ambition, but we realized that we weren't winning in the way that we knew we had won in the past. And we are competitors. We are so like deeply rooted in competition and the need to win. And so we had to look at our current state and build our business case for change. And it's funny, at Nike, we're storytellers, as you know, which I think we leverage that strength and capability. And it actually is one that has made us good at change over the years, because we can, like you experience hopefully as consumers, Nike story, our branding, our you know, the way that we engage and inspire our athletes and consumers is what we also leverage that skill set internally. So, you know, as we've got clear on that business case for change and got really clear on our strategic priorities, now we're embedding those in our goals, which is really driving not just what your business outcomes are, but what your leadership behaviors and team behaviors need to look like. So they are one and the same and integrated and fully aligned. And I do say at all levels of the organization, because we have to ensure that we're constantly that strategic deployment all the way through our 75,000. We cannot stop with our leaders. And maybe just because it's top of mind for me, one thing that we have been doing more recently and we've actually extended our leadership team in terms of our vice presidents through our next level leaders. So we've almost quadrupled those that we're formally engaging with to increase that, like, again, that deployment through the rest of the organization. But we've been building their skill around the change story. And so first time we've done it more formally at Nike, but we've taken our business case for change, our strategic vision and priorities, and we're helping them through frameworks to be able to make it their own. It has to be aligned to the vision, but bring their personal energy and personal, their own purpose to that strategy, so that then they can start to cascade that throughout. So that, again, that's both the behavior that we're driving and also, you know, a skill that we're helping build with our leaders right now to make sure that, like, we're embedding it.
I love that, because the idea that because somebody has said this is what we're going to do and we all have to now comply, that is such a, you know, 80s, 90s, maybe even early aughts model. You know, there's no, and it smacks of hierarchy and us telling you what to do. The fact that you're allowing and permitting and encouraging people to infuse their own energy and their own stories, that's why I wake up in the morning, to not to come and do your the thing that you're excited about, but the thing that I'm excited about. So I love that. I love that. Vanessa, do we have any questions that have come in?
We do have some questions. And I know we only have a few minutes left, so we'll get to as many of them as we can. But so we had one come in. How have you persuaded senior leaders who've decided to implement a new software? How do you persuade them to incorporate organizational change management into the work, measure success, instead of just saying, go implement software XYZ? And are there behaviors and processes that can help you sort of elevate that discussion and I do have to jump in here because this is like right in the world of one of my biggest clients right now. And then Russ and Suzy will be curious what you have to add. But working with an organization, large scale ERP implementation, impacting the whole organization. And we're facing a similar challenge at the beginning, where end users didn't understand why are we doing this. And I think a couple things that really helped. One, continuing to ask executives to articulate why are we doing this and what's the value that it's going to bring, right? And really making sure that they can get clear on that message. I think the other piece was really sort of holding up a mirror of feedback from end users and the folks on the team that have to design and implement the software. And I think coming with some of that sort of synthesized discovery, it becomes undeniable where some of the gaps are. If you're hearing from end users, I don't know why I have to do this. It's just overwhelming. I don't see how it's going to help the business. I like what I have today. That can start to help, I think, the folks issuing the mandate see that they're missing a key component of the plan.
Suzy, you just talked about implementing Workday. Like, how did that go?
You know, it has to be, you know, it's interesting when you say persuade senior leaders, it is theirs to own. And so I think if a project team is having to persuade a leader on an initiative that there's something already wrong with the change strategy, you know, if the company is behind it and it's investing, you know, again, it's scarce dollars and resources towards something, then, you know, it has to start with the leader. And so, and I also, as I read the question, thanks, Guy, for sharing it, is I also think that this is the catch-22 of change. I would say if you don't feel like there's a plan like behind it, it should just happen. Now, the flip side of that is then no one's understanding what organizational change management is in your framework. So I'm having to constantly say, well, that thing that we just did there, that is a change activity. You shouldn't know, and we didn't have to tell you a plan. It should just be in like feel like just part of the process. But then people aren't always connecting the dots of, well, what's change management? Well, that was change management. So I think you have to be able to do both. But I would just say always the advice is it has to be owned by the business and the leaders, not by a project team. You're the enablers of it. You have to ensure that your business leaders and team leaders are out in front.
And I'm going to build very quickly. If change, you said something, if change feels like an episodic thing, that we'll get over with this and we get this over with and we can get back to what we were doing before, we've lost the plot, right? That's when people feel this element of change fatigue is like another thing, as opposed to building capability. Somebody once said to me, implementing this is about technology, but it doesn't really matter what it's about. When you're going through this kind of change, nothing is more strategic than going through all of your business processes and rewiring them in a way that'll help you be more effective and more efficient. Like there is nothing that's going to add more value aside from coming out with your next Jordan or whatever it is, right? Love that story too. At some point, I'll get my wife to tell you the story about how she didn't know who Michael Jordan was when he introduced himself to her and said, "Hi, I'm Michael." Oh, it's great. It's a great story.
Okay, we've got to hear that one.
We will. But really having everybody own this and really embrace it, got to be key. Vanessa, do we have time for one more?
Yes, I think we have time to quickly answer one more and then we'll kind of put a bow on things. So one other question was, what are key tech adoption metrics to measure success of the change management efforts? And to that, I would say adoption is one metric of success, but it should in no way be your only metric of success, because you could be adopting a technology that's not helping you drive the value you're looking to drive. So the metrics should be tied to what is this new system or software trying to help you achieve, right? So we were talking to an organization that's implementing, it's a nonprofit, implementing a new CRM with the hope of increasing community engagement, increasing donor pools and donations at the bottom line. If it's an ERP system, it may be around efficiency of resource management. It may be around transparency of financial data, but the metrics should be tied to what's the value that this new system is meant to drive. I think so often we get stuck in adoption as the only metric of success, and you can't stop there or you're missing a key component.
Suzy, thoughts from you on that one?
I love that, Vanessa. I'm also leading an initiative as well as being in my role of transformational change. So I have to be a practitioner of what I am sharing with many of our other leaders. But I think, when we're looking also at adoption, I think you're right. It has to be tied back to what the business case and value case is. We've got much better at our value case. And that could be a productivity, it could be a growth strategy, but it also could be, as we measure, how are we defining value? How are we sustaining value? But also, what is the experience of our teammates, our employees through that? So that's where the culture component comes in. We're trying to, and some of that is the more qualitative components of engagement. But I think that, trying to be much more holistic in the way that we define success as well.
And tying it back to the business case, tying it back to why. Otherwise, why are we doing it? So I want to be mindful of everyone who's given us 30 minutes of time on a Wednesday morning, afternoon, evening. Suzy, it was a delight. It was terrific. I feel like this started the conversation. We need to have a follow-on. So thank you for joining us early this morning from Portland. Vanessa, thanks for joining us from Seattle this afternoon. It was great having you on. And we get to do these pretty much every couple of weeks, where we'll dive into a topic with a profound sense of insight from a leader who's doing it in the field. So thank you, Suzy. Thank you, Nike. And look forward to following up. We'll send out the recording. We'll send out the guide. Look for us on socials, be it on LinkedIn or wherever else you are. Probably LinkedIn mostly, and look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks for our follow-on. But thank you so much for the time today and your rich engagement. It was great spending time with you.